Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host of Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Nitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Okay, welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. We have a powerful interview today. We have Thaddeus Dryja and Joseph Poon, and they wrote the white paper on the Lightning Network. So welcome to the podcast, you two.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Thaddeus, why Bitcoin? I mean, what's a little bit of your background? Why are you playing with this magic internet money?
It's really fun stuff. I think I read about it in like early 2011. And sort of was like, that's crazy. That's never going to work. And it sort of reminded me of like Nutella, where it was this network that never quite died. And just even today, it still exists.
Yeah, like the GN, Nutella, right?
Yeah. And I was like, that's really cool. Sort of watching it, and I was like, this is never going to work. And just kept watching and reading about it for like a year. Actually, I think I started mining like the next day just to see how it worked. And I mined like, 5 coins.
So you were reading this paper early, huh?
2011. And then,
what were you doing that you would be reading a paper like this?
It was Wired, right? Some like senator talked about the Silk Road or something.
Okay.
It was like, so there was a Wired article. I was like, oh, what is that? And like reading the white paper and stuff. So then, I actually went to get a PhD in cryptography because I was like super into Bitcoin after a year or so reading about this. My background's in like electrical engineering. And I did that for a year, but academia at the time was not really into Bitcoin. So I moved to San Francisco and just started working at all these Bitcoin companies. And now that's how I met.
Yeah. And so, Joseph, you were actually kind of brainstorming this whole Lightning Network years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this idea had its genesis, and then what was the catalyst to actually start getting a little bit more than just daydreams.
Yeah. So with Bitcoin, I first heard about it in 2010, and I didn't really look into it that much because I thought it was all silly.
And you don't have a ton of coins.
No. I thought it was all completely silly. I actually don't have many coins. I think I'm probably the fewest out of everyone at the meetups. But no, I heard about it first in 2010. I thought it wouldn't work. I thought it was just silly. My background's in finance, so I was like, all the models, it's like, this is basically, I thought it was impossible, right? In 2011, when it started to work, when people started to use it for real, trade, I actually started looking into it. And it was very similar to Taj, where it was like, oh, I think this works. Let's actually look into this. And it seemed to work. If you actually read it, you read the code and it makes sense. Except for the problem where, everyone needs to communicate all transactions with everyone else. That really tripped me up.
Right, because of the Owen squared.
That
issue,
type of
right?
thing where, the more participants join, the higher the velocity of money, the higher the trade will be. And at that point, the system seems like it would start breaking down. I believe that was sort of as part of Taj's research, he was like, yeah, that's the first reply to Satoshi. When he announced it.
Satoshi, put a link to the paper, told everyone on this mailing list. The first reply was like, this is a great system, won't scale. That was the first thing anyone ever said about Bitcoin.
And here we are.
Yeah.
So it really tripped me up. And I've been thinking about it for a while since I first heard about Bitcoin. And I sort of presented a lot of those ideas in 2013 in San Jose at a Bitcoin conference. I sort of participated in a hackathon. I think a lot of people didn't really understand what I was saying at the time, simply because it was it was a little bit early for a lot of those ideas. Since then, I've been refining it and thinking about it.
And the actual paper. The paper is 59 pages. So.
Yeah,
it sure is refined.
A lot of that is formatting. But no, I've been participating in the Bitcoin meetup space in San Francisco.
It's size 24 font.
Yeah. I've been participating in the meetup space in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, that's actually how I learned about Lightning. I went to the first like real presentation that you guys did on it. Gosh, like
In
March
January,
or something,
yeah.
or January, yeah.
February.
Yeah, somewhere
so-
back there. I was in town and like wandered into the meetup, and I'm like, oh, this solves the problem.
That was the first time you gave a talk
Yeah.
in SF. Yeah.
You gave one previously, Tej, but
2 or 3, I think.
yeah. But we actually me and Tej met at SF Bitcoin Devs and SF Bitcoin Social. And that's sort of like where like I talked to him about this idea and he's like, oh yeah. And then like we've been working together and he refined a lot of the ideas and we've been collaborating on that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was trying to do similar things, but like with a way different way. I was like, well, maybe if this guy doesn't know, try to sort of wall off information. It's like, okay, this party doesn't know this and this party doesn't know this, but the Lightning Network idea is like a much better way to do it. So like, let's do this.
And there's a lot of exploration using like, probabilistic payments and things like that as well.
So what is it? Like, what is the Lightning Network?
So the Lightning Network is a way to do high volume transactions using real Bitcoin transactions. And it functionally operates as a smart contract system using the Bitcoin scripting built into Bitcoin.
I got a
You have a shorter one?
It's a routed net. It's a switched routed network on top of a broadcast medium. Right? So like radio station, everyone gets it. You can't have everyone using the same radio frequency at the same time.
Okay.
But like if you're in a network center and there's all these different switches and wires, it scales a lot better.
Okay, so now we're getting
It's an analogy, but
well, no. Satoshi said that Bitcoin is how we send value over a communications channel.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I like this how we're honing in on we need a switch operator, right? Or we need a way to not be on the same frequency, all on the same particular channel of the communications, and yet we can use the programmable aspects of Bitcoin to abstract and make interoperable a lot of these different networks and protocols.
Right. So,
because I mean, are we talking about like Bitcoin's kind of the base protocol, and then we'll have protocols built on top of it, right?
Yeah.
Just like the internet and the different layers we have in that stack.
So right now with Bitcoin, the way people send transactions between each other, it's sort of like if the internet was designed where everyone sends every single packet to everyone. So, like as people start using the internet more and more, well, everyone needs to upgrade their lines. Everyone is going to be reaching capacity. And then that creates a lot of problems. And it's sort of like, I don't care about everyone else's traffic. I don't think, like someone browsing the New York Times, I should receive that traffic.
But you do care about how much money everyone else has.
Yes.
So this is the tricky.
Because you got to have distributed consensus.
Yeah. You also have to know how much money there is total.
Yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, who knows? Right. So there was a fun post by Greg Maxwell about the hamburger and the foot and the doorknob.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but anyway. But yeah, so you do need some global view of the network in order to assure, okay, there's a certain amount of coins and where are they? But you don't care about all the transactions happening necessarily. So these seem to be incompatible in that I need to know the global state, but I don't care about all the transactions. So this is a way to sort of batch and, caching layer in that I don't care about every transaction, but I want to see a state every so often.
Yeah, because when I had Dr. Back on for our week with Adam Back, he described the Lightning Network as a write cache layer for Bitcoin.
Very, very similar.
It's very similar, but it's a lot more. It's a lot of the interesting aspects of the Lightning Network is that you're not delegating this write cache to a third party where you give them your coins.
Yeah. All the channels are two-party.
Okay, so
you and someone else.
So is it an altcoin? No. Is it trustless?
Pretty much.
Well, can somebody take the coins without your permission?
If you screw up, maybe, but it's sort of like
the software will make sure you don't screw up in that way.
Right.
But the way it works is
in the software will be a wallet that's actually implemented this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So the wallet, it's similar to how your wallet in Bitcoin would not, send coins to a random address.
Yeah, and it makes sure. Yeah, and it makes sure that you haven't flipped a bit or something.
Yeah.
You have these redundancy checks and these checksums and stuff like that.
But it's not the situation where it's like Mt. Gox, where you give them all your money, they can run off with it, right? There's no type of custodial trust in the system.
Okay, so you're not actually transferring the private keys to someone else.
No, you never move private keys. You keep all your. The only thing is, if your equipment goes down, there is the possibility of loss. But that maybe is the same in Bitcoin.
You got to back up your got to back up your keys.
In this case, it's not just backup. There can be time windows where I need to go onto the network within the next week and perform a transaction, or I may lose money. There can be situations like that.
Okay.
But with later soft forks that will happen in Bitcoin, you can delegate that to a third party who will check for you, and that situation can be prevented.
Well, how about privacy? And since we're creating an additional network on top of our original Bitcoin network, are we going to be able to have like onion routing in that network also? I mean, what type of privacy can we get out of this?
Yeah, we're working with Roastbeef is his GitHub name. He's designing and building onion routing on top of the Lightning Network. That's probably going to be a bit later than version beta 0.1. But there's definitely people working on how to, maintain privacy even on top of the Lightning Network.
What about, crossing the streams? Can this work with Litecoin or something? Or like how might that actually be applied?
So the way Lightning Network actually works is it creates this network topology for transferring coins where you are connected to other participants and you can move funds through them. And you can enter into these relationships and close out these relationships at will. And when you enter into them, that's one blockchain transaction. And when you close out of it, that's another one or two blockchain transactions.
So we're actually using blockchain as then the settlement currency for all the transactions that are taking place within the network?
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting view that will sort of become, my view is that I think the settlement layer view will really be the way people use blockchains in the future, simply because if you take the view of the blockchain as an adjudication system, everything makes a lot more sense. It's sort of like how if you enter into legal contracts with another party, you don't go to court every time. In fact, probably less than, a small portion of 1% of all legal contracts in the world really go to any type of court. So you can take the view that, an entry on the blockchain is sort of like going to court. If we both agree on the state of our contract, we don't really need to have the global computer verified, right?
It's also it's better than court because you know exactly what the judge is going to say.
Well, it's programmatic. It's programmatically deterministic.
So it's even less likely because, why go to court if you know you're going to lose? You just, both parties can compute and see exactly what the servers, the blockchain will do. So
yeah, this is fascinating. I was recently on a panel with Nick Sazbo, and he made some very good comments about kind of the use of these smart contracts in Bitcoin. I bet people could find it, bitcoininvestor.com. If you really want to go try and find the panel, it was Nick Sazbo and Ed Moy and myself. So, you can go into further depth there. But when we're looking at how this is actually implemented, how's it going to look in the user interface for people?
I think
Bitcoin's hard enough.
Yeah. So I think for the people that use QR codes, it'll be very, very similar where, you just take the picture of the QR code and then you make a payment. If you make a payment on the computer where you copy and paste the Bitcoin address, it'll still have the Bitcoin address, but it'll also add a host name at the end. So it'll be, for example, Bitcoin address at tracemeyer.com or whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah. You need to actually create a TCP connection, connect to the server, and then negotiate. So in Bitcoin, if I have your Bitcoin address, I can just send you Bitcoins. You have no say in whether you receive them or not. In the Lightning Network, to establish channels and receive payments, both parties need to be online and communicating. So it's basically, Bitcoin address, which is, pub key hash at hostname. And then I connect to you. If you're online, I can make the payment. So you can't be offline and receive.
Well, it's been a long time, but I thought we used to make transactions kind of that way, or at least with the IP address.
Oh,
or
the
something
initial,
like way back.
there was
really early.
There
like,
was that
doing
functionality
something like that.
Yeah, I think they took that up pretty quick.
It didn't work.
It didn't really work.
Yeah, like the whole bit DNS thing. Like,
yeah, but so you have to be online to receive payment. Although actually, we didn't mention this. You can be offline if you have pre-established channels and both people are, not on the internet but are connected to each other. Then they can make payments.
And so we can actually talk about that a little bit later, because there could be high frequency trading in like a data center where you're basically offloading the functionality of the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or something onto something like this, right?
Yeah, but you could have a network of 100 participants. They all have Bitcoin. They all go on a cruise ship with no internet. They all transact with each other. When they get off the cruise ship, they all broadcast onto the blockchain. And that's possible to do on the Lightning Network, which you really can't do on the Bitcoin blockchain since it assumes network connectivity.
Yeah. So Thaddeus, maybe you can talk a little bit about the testnet getting forked and broken. Because I mean, we're talking about a scalability solution. It's been very contentious, this whole block size debate issue, which increases throughput, but doesn't really seem to increase scalability in a material way. And now, like, BIP 101 on testnet, like, maybe you can tell a little bit, like, what happened with this? Well, how's it affecting developers who are trying to use testnet and stuff like that?
We're maybe a specific case in that our cloud infrastructure is a whole bunch of Raspberry Pis under my desk because it doesn't make so much noise. So yeah, if you have very limited hardware, which I think it's a kind of nice way to test as well, is that this is a very resource limited, Raspberry Pi. We're 21 selling the Bitcoin computer, which is a Raspberry Pi. So that's sort of a baseline. Maybe Bitcoin should always be able to work on something that small. I don't know.
Or even if you 100x it, right? It's sort of this model where if you make Bitcoin a little bit larger, it's a commensurate increase in in hardware requirements.
Yeah. So in the case of the last few days, someone with some mining power said, hey, let's try the hard fork ability of BIP 101 on the testnet, which I think is a really good test. I mean,
let's see what happens.
It's a little annoying for me. I was trying to do other things not involving any of this on testnet, and then it stops working, but whatever. So it wasn't so much that there were larger blocks, because my software didn't recognize the 101 larger blocks. It was that there were extremely large reorgs where, you had thousands of blocks deep reorgs, and you'd run out of memory and all these things.
What's a reorg?
So
are we talking about a time machine here?
Basically, yeah. You go back in time a few hours, days, and you say, okay, I'm going to mine off of this other block and, make these blocks that you think are the current blocks obsolete.
So this is why, we have, say, six confirmations, but you're talking about a reorg or going back and potentially rewriting after thousands or 2,000. But this is on testnet.
This is a crazy world.
Right, because we got to test all this stuff, right?
Well, the main thing in testnet is the difficulty drops down very quickly, and then to almost, to 1.
So it's like Dogecoin.
It's even worse.
It's even worse.
It's very volatile, and there's no real transactions. So there'll be empty blocks for weeks, and then someone starts using it, and all the blocks are full because they just dump millions of transactions. So it's very volatile. It's good for testing because things break on testnet because it's extreme situations.
And we don't actually have economic value at stake.
Yeah, the last 2 were abandoned because they started to have economic value, in that people started trading testnet coins for real coins.
Where Poloniex?
No, just on Bitcoin talk forums.
Bitcoin
I think.
I joke. I joke.
And so then it's okay, so we're on testnet 3. Although testnet 3 is
Cripsy. They were trading them on Cripsy.
Yeah, testnet 3 has been around for a while though. 2012-ish it started. So it's a very useful tool to see what breaks, given, larger blocks, reorgs, things like that. Yeah, maybe if you're running a Raspberry Pi, you can't keep up with BIP 101. So
it broke your cloud, huh?
Well, but it also, it probably could if the software were designed differently. Yeah. So it's maybe we should rewrite some of these things so that it can deal with
Who's going to do that?
Well, I'll help,
So how about some specific use cases of Lightning Network? Who's going to hire Bitcoin to do stuff? Who's going to use the Lightning Network to actually get economic value and utility out of it?
So I think the biggest value for Lightning is for micropayments, first and foremost. Micropayments aren't interesting right now simply because they don't really exist. Right now, Visa charges 29 cents plus, 3 to 5% per transaction. Even PayPal, a purely electronic system, charges 30 cents for goods and services plus, 2.9%. They don't really want to do micropayments. There's a lot of interesting opportunities, but it can only exist if there's a system that can support it.
Why do you think that is? Oh, yeah. The reason why?
Yeah. So the reason why I don't think they exist is because fundamentally these institutions hold custody of your funds. When they hold custody of your funds, they need to do underwriting on any transactions going through their network. So functionally what happens is if you make a payment and someone wants to charge back, they're going to be giving you a phone call.
And it starts using customer service resources, and it costs money, and
legal threats,
lawyers, and all this stuff. Yeah.
Over a payment that could be 1/100th of a penny.
Right? And so that's why we see credit cards, they're great for $10 to about $100. Anything above that, not so much. Anything below that, it's just not worth the time. And wire transfers, serve that $100 and above functionality for the most part. And so, we just have this huge area like $10 and below, which does not get used at all. I mean, even cash, we can only do pennies, right?
So actually Bitcoin, a lot of people thought could do micropayments. Right now, transaction fees on the Bitcoin network are about 3 to 5 cents US dollars.
So now they're getting priced out of the Bitcoin network.
Yeah.
Like faucets or Satoshi Dice or, other use cases like that. They're already starting to get priced out of the Bitcoin network.
So what Lightning really lets you do is do functionally an unlimited amount of transactions inside this network for very, very, very low cost. And you could do real micropayments. And by micropayments, I mean like 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, well, 1 Satoshi.
Yeah, or 100 million. Yeah.
1 Satoshi is we actually have less than a Satoshi in the software, but that's trusted.
Yeah.
Below 1 Satoshi, it doesn't, it's sort of like, I'll owe you half a Satoshi because you can't actually settle on the Bitcoin blockchain.
But what this lets you do is let you send, a 1/1,000,000th of one Bitcoin. And that allows you to do really, really interesting applications that haven't existed previously.
Yeah, so, when we're dealing with corporations, I like reading their 10Ks, and it's like, oh, we've got, $400 billion of assets. Like Berkshire Hathaway has $360 billion of assets. So in order for Warren Buffett, who's the CEO, he has to set policy that goes, down the chain, and the people in their different organizations, they operate according to policy because, that transaction is just a microtransaction to Warren Buffett, but it might be $100,000 or something. Mm-hmm. How is that similar to what we're talking about here in terms of being able to, perhaps set policy that then governs some of these use cases?
So a long, long time ago, Nick Szabo was talking about micropayments, and his thinking was this is all going to be automated. So if you're using, let's say, micropayments to pay for advertising, human interaction is just silly, right? The cognitive load of thinking about these types of payments that could be, amount to 1/10 of a cent. It's just not worth it to think about.
Right, because of the time and attention is your only real limited commodity.
Yeah.
And as society gets wealthier and wealthier, that threshold for what constitutes a microtransaction will rise. I mean, if we get wealthy enough as a society, and we even see it with billionaires, they don't want to even have to think about what the price of something going into the fridge is. Yeah, they just want to set policy and it wants to show up.
They have people to buy stuff for them.
Yeah.
So similarly, if you have your phone and you have your settings, your policies on, okay, I will pay this much to not see ads on news sites, and I will pay this much to get internet from places, and I will pay this much for... you set your policies for how much you're willing to spend. And you could even have your policies automated. Like, hey, if I just got paid and I have a lot of money, get a little more liberal with my use of money and buy more.
So eventually you might see these policies or expert systems start becoming more programmatic themselves, where, you start applying machine learning to, your spending and things like that. And there may be interesting applications for that as well.
So I mean, we're starting to talk about, machine to machine payments. We're talking about the Internet of Things. Isn't that kind of like how your brain works? A little bit like, I mean, maybe you could have got an analogy for us here.
So for me, like a lot of IoT is just silly, right? A lot of it's like your toaster paying your fridge. It doesn't make sense, right? I think the whole IoT narrative makes a whole lot more sense if you view it from a micropayments first perspective. And what I mean by that is if you view all IoT devices globally as a single entity and a single system, then taking a view of payments first builds this sort of incentive model into this system. So in effect, devices to device payments sort of become a dopamine within the system. So you build this incentive structure and individual devices want to maximize the amount of Bitcoin they have. And that creates a more functioning system.
And it gets fed right into those plugged into the matrix, right? They get their dopamine. I actually interviewed Eric Jennings. He's the CEO of Filament, which they raised $5 million for Internet of Things applications. And so
you've talked to them.
You've talked to the Filament guys? Yeah. So I think we're going to see just a huge explosion in automation, kind of like when electricity came on the scene, now people had washing machines and it freed up just a lot of time. And now they didn't have to spend all this time making candles. You know how much human labor actually went into making candles? I mean, people, even today, if you have to earn about $10 a day in order to have access to a washing machine. And, that's kind of the threshold. $100 a day, you have access to airplanes. And, as the world population, the billions of people get that access to the washing machine, it's going to free up time. They can read books to their kids can then go to college. And next thing you know, we're like the threshold for microtransactions just keeps getting raised and raised because we get more productive and more wealthy as a society.
Everything's getting cheaper.
Everything gets just so much cheaper. So how we mentioned it earlier, the high frequency trading application, like how might that function? And like colored coins, can they function on this stuff?
So I don't want to oversell it now because what we're working on now, it'll happen in seconds. I don't want to say microseconds because it probably won't. I mean, that's really hard to, getting the last, really fast part is hard software engineering.
I think if everyone's in a building, right, you could get milliseconds, no problem. And that's a lot better than, a block confirmation of 10 minutes.
And these are trustless atomic transactions that then get settled onto the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, so there's no custody, there's no, delegating of custody, right? So if you had this type of asset coin, you can have, instantaneous trading between them, nearly instantaneous trading.
Real fast. Not because the HFT, if you're talking to HFT guys who actually do this stuff in New York City, they're talking about microseconds and nanoseconds. We're not quite there yet.
But what is the social role of microseconds and nanoseconds? Right. I think milliseconds is sufficient to build a functional system.
Well, and we've got post-trade settlement, which costs banks, billions and billions of dollars every year, and yet it could all be automated programmatically. And they actually post-trade settlement, they're dealing with paper still. They all know they need to fix this part of their system.
So if you say the actual trade execution happens in within a couple milliseconds for HFT type stuff, that they're not done clearing and settling. That's the standard T+3. They're talking about making it faster, T+2, in some regions.
How about T+ a millisecond?
Yeah.
Actually, you wouldn't even have T because you're atomically settling when you execute the smart contract and decide to buy, right?
Yeah. We don't really know. We're sort of building it for Bitcoin. We're not quite designing it for equities and all this sort of blockchain technology narrative. Oh. But it's definitely going, something like this or the Lightning Network will be a big part of that. Whatever ends up being, it's sort of we're building it for Bitcoin today because Bitcoin's there today.
But we may be building it for this next year,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So very contentious question, Joseph, the block size debate, where do you fall?
Me, I'm pretty, I think there's a wide range for what is acceptable. I think it's sort of the meta discussion that interests me, where it's sort of is this a good idea to do a hard fork right now? I think, obviously Bitcoin, can't support that many transactions. Lightning will definitely help in increasing the amount of transactions available to participants. But if you can't even get onto the system, you can't even make a blockchain transaction, you need to be able to accommodate for that. Whether it be, 248, 8 megabytes or whatever, I think I'm sort of okay with, whatever number is chosen as long as it's practical. I'm not one of those people that believes, block size should be 1 megabyte forever.
That'd be disappointing.
But, if that's what happens, then that's what happens.
I mean, that's sort of what we did. Like, one of the reasons to build this is like, what if we're stuck? And sort of like our opinion doesn't matter that much because we're not mining and we don't decide these things. But if it gets stuck at 1 megabyte forever, well, Lightning can help more people use it than otherwise would be able to. I hope it doesn't get stuck at 1 megabyte forever.
But what Lightning really solves is not just block size, right? It solves this dichotomy that will exist with with full blocks. So what'll happen is, let's say you think 8 megabyte makes sense. Let's say you think 1 megabyte forever makes sense. It sort of doesn't matter, right? If the primary threat to Bitcoin is when the block reward goes down. Right? Let's say, right now we're at 25 Bitcoin per block. Let's say it eventually, goes asymptotically close to zero. What will happen is that you really want transaction fees to go up, right? In order to pay
for the securities.
Yeah. So what you want is basically the blocks to be somewhat constrained in size, right? And you want people to be able to pay, what would be a fraction of what people get for block rewards today instead of zero, right?
Or so small that you can have reorgs all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a mess.
So what Lightning lets you do is have moderate size transaction fees, but still be able to do everyday transactions on using real Bitcoin without delegating it to a third party.
So we get to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah. The idea is
they're happy. We're happy. Yeah.
That's the idea. The idea is to have the cake and eat it too. It lets you make sure that, miners are going to get paid, and you could do, transactions that are worth 1 penny.
Right. Trillions of them.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. So if a blockchain transaction fee is something like $3 to, so it'll cost you $3 to open or close a channel. That's kind of too much to use Bitcoin for everyday things. But if you're only doing it by opening and closing a channel a few times a year, it's no big deal at all. And
this problem will exist no matter what block size you choose.
Yeah.
So our last question, why do you hire Bitcoin? Why do you want to own Bitcoins? Why do you hire it?
Well, I don't know that many Bitcoin, but it's primarily a technical interest for me.
Okay.
Yeah. I also saw it as this is going to be really hard to kill. This is a cool, weird, emergent, meta equity kind of system that, I've never seen anything like it before. It's a currency, but it's not really a currency in that, I have a bunch of $20 bills in my wallet. That doesn't really make me feel like I want to help the current Federal Reserve system, even though I am a stakeholder. Right?
I think owning a little bit certainly helps. Yeah.
Whereas once a lot of people in Bitcoin is I kind of like this thing. I kind of want it to work better. And that's what we're working on. Yeah. Dollars don't quite work that way.
They just don't do it for you.
Well, I mean, they're obviously very useful, but you don't feel invested in the entire financial system by having some cash.
But I mean, they got the picture of dead people on there that are your rulers, right? I mean,
I've never met those guys. I mean, they all died before I was around. So,
well, on that note, it's really been a great interview. Thanks for taking the time out to come and help explain the Lightning Network to everybody and some of these potential use cases. And I'm sure that as the technology continues maturing, we'll pick up this discussion again and see where it's at. Do we have any estimated timeline on when we might actually have code?
We want to get a version that'll work on our own testnet within 3 months.
On all these Raspberry Pis?
Yeah.
No, we're on Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, so we'll get it out within 3 months. We're
gonna have binaries.
So that's when February, March 2016?
Yeah. And we'll have, a GitHub repo out soon.
Yeah, GitHub should be this year, definitely.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so we'll have stuff. And then, Rusty's working on his own GitHub repo. We're having an implementation in Go using BTCD's code base. There's other people working on it. So there's a lot of work being done.
Yeah, there's a lot of community development on it. And we're definitely very happy with that. It's good because you need a lot of different implementations. There's a lot of different wallet implementations. Like there's Bitcoin
different routing implementations, different node discovery. There's a lot of ways. It's not like Bitcoin where everyone needs to run the same software.
Right.
So it's more like browsers in that you can have 3 or 4 different browsers. They might look slightly different and render the page different, but they all work, and that makes a better ecosystem.
But eventually, you need them all to communicate with each other.
You want HTML to look more or less the same.
So where do people go to learn more about the project?
Lightning.network.
So lightning.network.
It's pretty bare bones at this point. We might spiff it up, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being with us. We've had Thaddeus Dryja and Joseph Poon, the designers of our Lightning Network, which hopefully will help us scale Bitcoin to trillions and trillions of transactions worldwide. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.